It's an interesting paradox because the minute you say, wow, this is all my fault, it's actually the most empowering feeling because you have the power to do something about it. If it's all my fault, I get to change it. If it's someone else's fault, it's actually disempowering. It's victim. You have no ability to change that thing out there. But if it's in your hands, in your control, in your ability to do something about, my goodness, that's an ability to really make change.
Welcome to The Secret Life of Great Leaders, a podcast by Triple Goal. We share deep transformational conversations around leadership and personal development to help you uncover the unseen facets of human growth and leadership impact. I'm your host, Michael Bunting. On today's episode of The Secret Life of Great Leaders, we're delighted to welcome Natalie McNeil, Vice President and General Manager of AbbVie Australia and New Zealand. Nat's career spans some of the world's most influential healthcare companies, AbbVie, Allergan, Johnson & Johnson, and Novartis, where she's led people, strategy, and commercial performance at the highest levels. What makes Nat's story so compelling isn't just her success, it's a deep commitment to growth as a practice, not a destination. From her roots in HR to her current role leading a major pharmaceutical business, she's navigated complex, fast-paced environments while staying grounded in purpose, empathy, and curiosity. In this conversation, we explore what it really takes to grow as a leader, how to hold space for development in high-pressure roles, and why the most meaningful transformations often begin with the hardest questions we ask ourselves. So without further ado, welcome, Nat.
Hi, Michael. You are very generous in your commentary. Yeah, it's very generous, but thank you.
So Nat, before we dive into your history and your credentials, what first drew you to leadership? Can you remember a moment early in your career when you realized that leadership was something special, leadership something you wanted to do?
Yeah, it is an important question to ask. Leadership for me is ultimately about impact. The ability to have a positive impact on a business item, on a person and their development, on an organization at large is for me the broader definition of leadership. On the people leadership side, if you will, I really get my joy from seeing others grow and succeed. And so at the heart of it, that's the draw for me. It's fundamentally a practice of service, in fact. And so from my side, the real joy you get from seeing people achieve their absolute best, it's nothing short of thrilling, frankly.
And isn't it interesting that sometimes helping people achieve their best can be a tough process, isn't it? It can be not withholding the honest conversations that person needs to hear. So it's such a strange paradox, isn't it? That you're trying to help people, and sometimes trying to help people requires tough stuff, right?
Yep. In fact, I think I've been coined with the expression tough love, right? At my best, I think people do feel that discomfort because if it's understood that my intention or our shared intention is for that individual to grow and to become the best that they can be, it cannot come without discomfort. And so the willingness for a leader, your manager, your coach, to give you that brutally honest feedback in the right forum, in the right setting, et cetera, I think it's absolutely about that, because you cannot grow without some level of discomfort when you really are looking at the areas that you're not doing well in or you want to fundamentally improve.
So Nat, can you recall any moments in your career where you had sort of a pivotal moment around realization of you have to look, you have to do the uncomfortable work? It's not just this nice, smooth. I know often when I speak to junior leaders, they're like, oh yeah, they all look so successful and it just looks so together and everything's great. When you get to know the leaders here at that level, it's not the case. But did you have any key moments where you're like, wow, gosh, this is a bit tougher than I thought it would be?
Oh, yes. In fact, can I say many times, I think the path to leadership, it's the personal journey first. I think to have the if you will, credentials or the authority to lead others, I think you really have to deeply understand yourself and understand your impact on others. So the first work is looking in the mirror. It's your self-leadership. And so to answer your question, Michael, yes. In fact, one of the earlier experiences that I had was a realization that something that was seemingly, what's the word, innocuous, not such a big deal, was actually a bigger deal than I thought. And I think if I speak specifically to the example, the feedback sentence was, Nat does not treat people with dignity and respect. That was the sentence that I got a low score on. Now, I cannot tell you the profound shame, because if anything, it's the absolute opposite of my core values. It's actually all about treating people with dignity and respect. But when I dug into that in the discussions with my team off the back of the feedback, it looked like me being late to meetings. So in this, the way that this particular direct report described it to me was, well, you're always late. And I'm thinking, well, you know me, I'm Italian, giving all the reasonable reasons. But what that felt like to that individual was that I really didn't care about them. Now, and what was beautiful about that moment was it was actually quite simple. Now, when you go deeper and the work that I did and why am I late for meetings? Well, because I'm torn too thin, too many priorities. I can't say no to things. So when you dig underneath it, you get to something more real. So there wasn't a trick to get me more disciplined and to make me be more on time. The work was understanding why I didn't have an approach that was more, be it structured or whatnot, to help address the thing. But the reason I use that as an example is the practice that I had to solve for the issue or the sentence around dignity and respect was my ability to say no to requests. And unless I'd done a bit of work to unpack it with the honest feedback from my team on how it affected them and to understand why I was behaving that way, I never would have thought dignity and respect had a relationship with my inability to say no. So the point I'm trying to make is we've got to get a bit more curious when we get feedback from others. We've got to be willing to get comfortable with the emotion of it. And for me, it was deep shame, actually, at the time. But once you get past that and you can manage the feelings of it, there's actually work that can be done that can really improve it sustainably over the long term. But that comes with practice, which is probably the next thing we can talk about. But you've got to be willing to take the feedback. You've got to be willing to hear what your people are saying. You've got to be willing to deal with the emotion of it. And you've got to be willing to do something about it. Yeah.
Well, knowing a little bit of that history, I've been super privileged to know you for quite a while. I think your example is a quite profound example because it's not just that you were not respecting people's time, if you will, it's that you were also not respecting yourself. And that's been an amazing journey for you because by saying yes to so many and stretching yourself so thin, yes, that resulted in that feedback you got. But I remember that process was also an important learning for you right around, okay, hold on a second. Am I taking care of myself? And I think this is a really important analogy for all people who do growth work. That growth work, it's not about suffering. Yes, it's uncomfortable, but the point of it is actually healthier behaviors that lead to much more wellness for everybody, right? Does that make sense?
Yep. Absolutely it does. And that's, I think, the point is that the growth is your own versus the growth being others. So you can inspire growth in others, but fundamentally the work of leadership is your own growth. And so I think that's absolutely spot on. That work, while it did, if you will, solve the challenging down impact I had on my team, what was more remarkable and the surprise, I think, was that I got better. I found more peace. I was able to look at myself differently as a leader broadly across many aspects. And that's the true gift. But your point on it being practice, if you will, it's lifelong. I can still today, I see it quickly now when I'm derailing in a day, or I know exactly what's going on. So when you put the work to practice and to see it without judgment, you can actually quickly adjust. And I think that's the gift. It's the work is in the practice, just like going to the gym. To be fit, to be fit as a leader, you need to be constantly practicing. We know what it's like when we've missed our physical practice. We can start feeling sluggish. It's not you don't go to the gym for a finite period and then all of a sudden you're fit for the rest of your life. No, you have to go to the gym all the time, right? So it's a bit the same analogy. It is a lifelong commitment to the practice. But if you go to the gym every day or every other day, or whatever your routine is, it's easier. You're fit. You have all the benefits that come with that, and it's no longer the discomfort of the first couple of years. You're operating at a level that's more pleasurable, if I can say. You can laugh at yourself a bit more than you might have at the beginning of your journey. So I speak to discomfort as a genuine signal to know that actually you're on the right track. Think of it. That's how I think of it, rather than it being a permanent situation. It's actually quite the contrary. And that's an important message, I think, for those that are in their leadership journeys.
Thanks, Nat. I just want to mention, just in case people listening are going, "Wow, they're having a deep conversation. I'm not quite sure what this practically means in leadership." And I'll just give some of our data. So we measure 13 different behaviors that can derail leaders. We've researched it. We know they derail leaders, and there's 7 key discipline practices based on the world's most researched leadership model of what leaders need to do to become excellent at leaders. They're very practical. You've got to empower people. You've got to have a vision. You've got to have a clear set of values. You've got to create learning environments and so forth. And then there's these behaviors that derail us: people-pleasing behaviors, controlling behaviors, and some security-based defensive type behaviors. And what we know is that those behaviors, 50% of a leader's performance is dependent on behavior. Now, some people say that, "Oh, isn't it 80%? Our data tells us it's 50%, and that you could then conclude that the other 50% is intellect, it's intelligence, it's experience, right? It's the head. So in other words, you can have a very intellectual, brilliant leader who's smart, who's competent, who could do strategic stuff well, and they could be a psychopath, And then you could have another leader who's competent, but also incredibly good behaviorally with people. What we're talking about today is the behavioral component of leadership. The tricky part with behavior is that it's completely blind to us. We don't know. We often jokingly say something like, I can say to someone, "I'm not angry," right? Or, "I'm not critical, you're just an idiot." That we have this capacity to be really, really blind. We can actually be doing the bad behavior while we're denying the bad behavior, right? And as a senior leader, Nat, I know that it matters to you when you're working with your team that they have the ability to do both well and to improve and work on both. Well, not only competence, but also on behavior. And I wonder, from your perspective, where does it all start? Like, how do you know a leader's going to succeed in growing, or they're going to fail in growing, or they have the ability to look at their behavior or not? How do you determine, what do you look for in leading? If I'm a junior leader in your organization and I want to know, how do I look? I don't want to say image management is not the right word, but what does my boss want me to look at, a senior leader? What's important for me to excel long term as a leader?
Yeah, and there's probably many different answers to this, but I'll tell you what I look for, and that's full accountability, or in my words, own your shit. That is what I look for in myself and in my leaders, and actually for, if you will, aspiring leaders, those earlier in their career. And what do I mean by own your shit? It's an absolute willingness to be accountable for things that happen that are out of your control. Things happen, right? Shit happens. So when you can look at a situation and own it, and it's questions like, well, what's my part in this? How did I cause this? What could I have done differently? They're the questions you ask yourself. What am I going to learn from this? How do I do this better that's the kind of internal self-questioning, rather than, oh, well, that's Michael's fault, or that's the environment's fault, or the system is crummy, or when it's a blame or somebody else, or if that's the first question you ask yourself, you're not owning it. Now, in reality, it's always a bit of everything. There's many things that create problems or a situation that's unsuccessful. But if you can look at it and say, I own at least part of it, then that for me is the hallmark of the leadership that I believe is the most effective. Because at the end of the day, that's life, right? Like it's whether it's work or at home, things don't always go to plan. And the reason that it matters to me, it's an interesting paradox, because the minute you say, wow, this is all my fault, it's actually the most empowering feeling, because you have the power to do something about it. If it's all my fault, I get to change it. If it's someone else's fault, it's actually disempowering. It's victim. You have no ability to change that thing out there. But if it's in your hands, in your control, in your ability to do something about, my goodness, that's an ability to really make change. And I guarantee anybody that even if it is something really out there that you cannot see your part in it, there's a piece of it that you can point to yourself and say, wow, well, if I'd asked that question of my teammate last week, or if I gave that feedback when I saw this project was probably going off the rails, or if I had enabled more time to debate the challenges, they're the kinds of things that, to me, represent owning your shit, being fully accountable, which is crucial. The other part of that's important is as a leader, and a leader isn't a leader of others. You can be a leader in a team. Like if you're a leader within an organization, an individual contributor within an organization, if you're demonstrating that behavior, that way of thinking, it absolutely allows for others to look at themselves too. Because all of a sudden, nobody's blaming anybody. We're actually looking at the problem at hand and we're working to solve it. It gives the permission for others to be willing to also own their part in it. And it also gives you the right to hold others responsible for their part as well. So I think for me, it's such a core value for me, accountability. It's wrapped in honesty, integrity. If you're not willing to look at yourself first, I think it makes every other part of problem solving or innovating 1000% harder. Does that make sense, Michael? The way I've described it in a long-winded way.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's touched a few points in listening to you. Firstly, I've watched you do this so well through your career, right? You've done this consistently, coming back to this, and it's kind of touched a point in me where I know that for me, some people might ask the question, well, what if you're around people who just don't own any of their stuff, right? Like, and you're the only one owning, aren't you going to get into trouble? And I know that I did get into trouble like that at one point, right? And I just, I know you absolutely know this, right? That and you said it at the end there, I own my part, but it doesn't mean you don't own your part. And as a good leader, I'm not prepared to accept that you not own your part, right? And I think that's the point that you made earlier around, if I'm a leader and I'm in your team, I better be doing that practice. I better be doing that owning practice, not the blaming practice. Otherwise, I think I'm voting myself out of Nat's view that I have any ability to grow or improve as a leader and a human being.
Yep. And I hope Yeah, absolutely, and I hope. I mean, we should check in with my team and my direct reports. They know that about me and about themselves. And actually, the conversations that I have with my team in our one-on-ones, when we are talking about the business issues and challenges, because they're every single day. I mean, there's a problem every day. That's kind of the gig. The conversation tends to start with my direct report saying, "This has happened. I feel fully responsible, and here's why." And then we get into the conversation quickly. Okay, terrific. Well, let me give me feedback. What could I have also done differently to help you? And then, okay, what are we going to do about solving for it? Like, you can quickly move to really constructive action. The other thing is about it is sometimes it is literally a big mistake of your part. Like, you can own a lot more of something. Sometimes you own a lot less of something. And if you give yourself permission to again, really own it, mistakes happen as well. Like, there is a reality that something pretty significant has happened that you have failed to do. I have failed to do. And actually, it's okay, because that's the other part of it. And this is why I think safe cultures are the ones that truly drive innovation, because we do make mistakes and we get it wrong. And so fostering an environment where you can say, "Wow, I really got that wrong," is okay. It's absolutely okay, because if you cannot say it, you cannot learn. You just can't. Now, of course, if that becomes the theme, sorry, go ahead, Michael.
So Nat, it's interesting because what I'm really interested in is you seem to hold it so gracefully and in an empowered way. And I'm imagining some people might feel like that question would lead to a lot of self-judgment and a lot of you'd feel, you're saying, I feel really empowered when I do that. I'm guessing for some people, particularly if they go, "Oh my God, it's all my fault," they're going to feel crushed internally. Can you talk a little bit about how you've managed, which sounds, I think you're coming from a very mature place in this, right? That you've learned but can you just talk to a little bit about what's the difference between what's owning my part, taking accountability without beating ourselves to a pulp and feeling crushed for the whole of our day and week?
Yeah. And actually, Michael, you raise a great point, because I had a direct report in recent years in my prior role, and she's one of the most beautiful leaders that I've worked with. But she took accountability always on herself. So it became this self-flagellation, if you will, which was actually the shadow of it, which is not what we want, right? For me, and I worked with her a lot, and I think she's in a much better place now. But for me, it was the reframe of get curious, don't judge, to myself. That was what I would tell myself. Nat, let's get curious about this. Don't judge it. It's happened. And that itself that's years, Michael. I mean, this doesn't happen overnight, because I can certainly tell you in the earlier years, I've experienced that. I experienced, wow, it is my fault. Oh my God, am I going to lose my job? Is my boss going to think I'm an idiot? Da, da, da. All of those things absolutely surface. They still surface. There are still moments that I'm sitting in front of my leadership team and going, "Oh my gosh, I said we'd run this meeting on time, and here we are 15 minutes late." It's the simplest of things. I mean, we don't have to be profound in the ability to own it. But the practice has been to not judge the moment of it. And replace it with curiosity. Wow, why have I done that? And yeah, it's hard to do, but but again, I go back to kind of when this was sort of the begin or earlier in my years of it. It took a while, and I think you do need to have, one or two people around you that are a bit your cheerleader, that, in the moment when you are deciding to be fully accountable and owning it in completeness and feeling the emotional pain of that, who's around you to kind of hold you up like that. You need a bit of support. Like, if this is a team sport, leadership, it is certainly not, an individual sport. And I do say that because it's harder than I think it seems. I absolutely acknowledge it, because you're spot on. I mean, in corporate life, the ability to fully own something can have, or may appear to, or in reality have consequences that are dire. And so I don't say it lightly at all. It's not my intent to have it seem an easy thing to do. But I think that if you can start with the internal tape recorder in your head to look at it curiously versus with judgment, that's, I think, that internal journey that you need. And, find that person, one or two people around you that you can talk it through with and kind of feel it with them as you progress.
Yeah, beautiful. You asked the question earlier, does it make sense? And in our own work, as we've constantly tried to refine these they're simple but not simple concepts into really like repeatable, like sound bites that people can remember them. The most recent way we've described this is we've rearranged the center of the circle in our leadership circle. There's a growth circle process where the center is all about growth. And there's three principles to it. See it, which means see it as, and you've beautifully described that, the willingness to look at what I did, right, or what's going on. And then the second step is own it. So see it, own it. So in other words, don't then go, oh, I see this problem happen, I'm willing to acknowledge that, or I see this behavior I did, I'm willing to acknowledge it, but it's not my fault. Like, it's someone else, it's something else. Don't do that. That's the own it. That's what you've talked a lot about. And then the last step is regulate it, what we call regulate. So the corner of growth is see it, own it, and regulate it. And if because we've have some clients of ours that can see it and own it, but they can't regulate it. It's really interesting. And you then spoke beautifully earlier about practice, that practice. And that we would put that as, that's the regulate part, right? It's not enough to just see it and own it. You also have to actually do something about it, right? And
That's right.
if I'm in your team, I'm assuming, man, if I can see it, own it, regulate it, I'm going to be good. I'm going to be a good member of Nat's team. I'm not going to lose my job.
Yes.
I'm doing well. I'm progressing.
That's right. That's right. No one will lose their job for owning their shit. They won't. It's simple. In fact, I would argue that if you don't own your ship, that would put you on the brink, right? And I've had a couple of tough conversations with folks on my team about exactly this point. You have to be willing to grow. That's, I guess, what I'm asking people's commitment for, which means discomfort, which means owning your shit. But the piece on self-regulation, I think, is the hardest. I have an individual right now, an amazing leader, and her practice is delegation. Everything's got to be delegated. She's working on too many priorities, last-minute Charlie requests. She's holding on to tasks that should be others. So it's all a practice of delegation, and she's in the mess of it. It's not easy. It's back and forth. Sometimes she's throwing things out without setting. It's difficult. And I give her 1000% credit for it. It's okay, because it starts by being messy. And I think that's a bit the point. You've got to jump into the deep end. You can be drowning, flailing, but her willingness to stay true to the practice is the only thing that I'm looking at. And the fact that she's brought her team into the practice of it and sharing with them that she's trying to do this in service of them, because that's the feedback they've given her. When I ask her team for feedback, they're loving it. They're actually acknowledging her work. They're acknowledging it's not perfect, but they absolutely give her credit for the work. And I think that's the point, right? It's not easy, and it is messy, and you got to stick with the practice. So for me, I'm assessing my team on their commitment to it, not necessarily the outcome. Now, that's the early stages. Of course, that evolves over time, because then we have to move to the point of, okay, now we've got a bit of practice with it. We feel what that muscle feels like. We've kind of built some strength. And then we move to the mastery, which is self-regulation and practice, and being able to catch yourself in the moment and, feeling your body. Tricks that I use are, I put both my feet on the ground when I can feel my emotions rising. It's just a personal cue that I use to say, okay, something's happening with you, Nat. Take a moment, take a breath, and manage. And so again, years of practice. I still get it wrong all the time. But hopefully it's a bit more indexed to better than not, versus when I was earlier and starting out.
For someone listening who's on the cusp of stepping into a bigger leadership role, maybe feeling a little unsure, What's one practice or mindset you'd invite them to try as they grow into it?
I'd say be willing to look in the mirror first. So that's, if I expand on that, it's the beginning of being curious about what's your part in this for anything that presents itself to you as a leader, whether it's good or bad, even successes. You have a role in successes, but you also have a role in the big failures, the times when things go to plan. So my advice is first look in the mirror.
Beautiful. It's so profound you said that. I have seen tragically so many examples in my more than nearly 3 decades of work in this field. So many leaders derail and actually ruin the performance of their whole organizations just because of this one simple thing, that they just won't look at the impact of their own behavior. And it's just because it's too emotionally uncomfortable, right? And I think it's
Yep.
like, you know, this work, growth work, looking in that mirror is deeply uncomfortable, isn't it? But that's the gig, right? That's what makes great leadership. The
Yep.
willingness to look even when you don't want to.
You don't want to look. Okay. Because there will always be a piece that you want. There will always be a piece that you want. And I think that's the point. Yeah. So that would be my advice to someone starting out.
And then for me, I like, just out of personal curiosity, a lot of our friends and clients over the years have said, "Oh, this really translates into home life too, doesn't it?" And I'm just curious, you don't have to say much, but just to kind of comment, like, this idea of taking ownership of my part of it, it actually marries really well to John Gottman's research on what derails marriages. He needs this incredible research, and that one of what he calls the four horsemen, these things that derail relationships and marriages. One of them is defensiveness, which is the opposite, of course, of what's my part in this, right? That's not defensiveness. So I wonder if you could just share a little bit, like, how has this practice affected or been useful for you as a parent, for you as a wife?
Yeah. Oh God. The analogies are so starkly related, right, between parenting or marriage and leadership. Because again, it's the work of yourself on yourself. So I will say the one thing that, and I think it's when we started working together, Michael, and my kids were quite young. Um, I remember, and I had 3 kids under 2, exhausted all the time, like trying to, work it all out. It's a tough gig parenting. But the one thing that I learned from this leadership work that was a direct analogy and a practice that I put into my home life was saying sorry to the kids when I lost myself. And as a mum, you can scream at your kids, and I remember one day vividly coming back from one of, I think, our sessions, and I was literally exhausted, and that's of course your excuse, right? And there's a reality to it. And I yelled at my kids. They weren't getting into the bath or whatever it was, something silly at home. And I remember that as the minute I saw it, I was so ashamed. I thought, whoa, that I just went to them after and I apologized for yelling. I mean, the thing would have been relevant. Like, they probably weren't doing whatever they needed to be doing, but I was apologizing for my behavior, not the content, right? And I remember it, and I remember saying vividly, "I'm so sorry for yelling. I should never yell at you," like a real deep apology. And it was beautiful. And the kids were like, "Oh, that's okay, Mum, blah, blah, blah." I fully owned it. I didn't give the excuse, well, if you'd only got into the bath, or if you'd only, it wasn't about them. It was a full ownership of my behavior, because that is what I can control. And I think that for me is the direct analogy in my home life that changed the relationship with my kids. Because believe you me, Michael, I'll still come home from work and I'm grumpy or something's happened and I lose it with them. But I can say sorry, and guess what? They say sorry to me too, right? And even my beautiful Henry, who's about to turn 17, he'll say things like, "Oh, Mum, I'm so sorry for yelling. What I was saying was right, but I shouldn't have yelled at you." So it's kind of like this delineation between what he's trying to say, but the way, right? And there's something in that is, for me, it's the same, work and home.
Yeah, and again, I think that's firstly, thank you for sharing. That's such a lovely, lovely example. And it's also, again, just profound because what I hear you saying is I can still keep my boundary. I can still say this is not okay, but I can say the way I
Yep.
said it was not okay, even though what I was trying
That's
to
exactly
say is right. I mean, to have that maturity in a 17-year-old already is beautiful, right? That's
It's
amazing
pretty
that you've
special.
managed to role
Oh,
model that.
it is
Yeah,
amazing.
role model that.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
this is such an important point
That's true.
you raise is that uh, is owning your stuff doesn't mean losing your boundaries, right? It doesn't mean
No,
that,
in
oh,
fact, no.
sorry, you can do whatever you like. No.
Yeah. No, it's not. And actually, I think that's the point is that when you can just own the part of your behavior, which was not, it's never okay to yell at my children ever. That is a non-negotiable. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but rather than beating myself up for it, you own it, apologize for it. And actually that gives then permission in a way to have the conversation later when the emotions are diffused, because then you get to talk to your kids, or at least I'm talking to my kids to say, well, okay, Henry, so what happened? What was going on for you? And then what was going on for me? You can actually have a bit of a conversation about the thing because the behavior, the sort of the negative energy around it is gone. You've acknowledged that it's just not okay for me as a mum to behave. Yeah, so that's why it's actually giving you the right giving you the space to have the right conversation at the right time, rather than letting it live and die by this moment of rage for other reasons that have nothing to do with your kids, right? Yeah, that's right.
So, Matthew, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your experience, your journey, your own messy journey with us. I found it inspiring. I really loved chatting to you today.
Oh, Michael, well, it's always a pleasure, and I share my story in the spirit of constant practice, by no means that of mastery, but from a humble place of just constantly practicing. Thanks so much, Michael.
The Secret Life of Great Leaders is brought to you by Triple Goal, where good coaches become great and leaders grow their impact where it matters most. Discover more at triplegoal.com. Make sure to search for The Secret Life of Great Leaders in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Triple Goal, thanks for listening.